Hey everybody, welcome back to Getting Competitive in Hearthstone. I started the series around this time last year, playing the Coin Concede Listener series, and after a bit of a content lull, if you can call it that, we are finally back with a new competitive series. This time, however, it will be a little bit different. Instead of showing one series from the week, I'll be showing a highlight of various series I played in during the week or two I was getting content. Most of these games will come from THL and Qualifiers. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of this video, I want to remind you all to leave a like and consider subscribing. I make various content on this channel, like a podcast called The Deck Code, which I do with my good friend Axel K. Now this intro is going to be a little bit longer than intros in the future. I have a lot of ground I need to cover, and if you need to in the future understand what a lot of these terms mean, come back to this video. This will have all the information. But if you want to skip the intro and just jump around to the games, there'll be time codes below. I took a poll on my Twitter, which you can follow here, where I asked my followers what they would like to see from a competitive series. We had a mix of everything from highlights, the whole series, and even play-by-plays. So in this redo, we're going to be covering a mix of both. And leave a comment below. What would you like to see in the future? What can I improve on? Or just send out a general good vibe. All are appreciated. Since I'm going to pull from multiple series, I'm going to try and show highlights from each series rather than one whole series from one specific match. Because, let's be honest, showing each whole series would take several hours. So, I play in a league called THL, which stands for Team Hearth League, and is run by some awesome people, including Ridiculous Hats. I play in 2 different leagues this season, Legacy and Pro. Pro is your standard best-of-5 conquest format, like you would see in Masters Tour or Grandmasters, where deck lists are open and each player brings 4 decks and bans an opponent's deck. Legacy, on the other hand, is closed deck lists, where each player only knows the classes the opponent is bringing and brings different decks based on what they think the opponent would bring, and there is still a ban, it's still best of 5. Qualifiers are straightforward conquest best of 3 matches. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 different games from each series. Before each game, I will go over the deck I brought, as well as briefly touch on my opponents. As of recording this video, I am 1-2 in THL, in both series. The first week, I forgot to submit lists and was disqualified. A mistake for sure, but we're going to just chalk that up to giving my opponents a head start. The second week, I swept in Pro, going 3-0 and went 3-1 Legacy. See, I am a good Hearthstone player. Unfortunately, this week was not my week in any series. In Pro, I went 1-3. I brought decks that admittedly I wasn't fully confident with, and probably some poor choices, like Free Shaman, which was a deck I did well with the first week I played, but definitely underperformed both in beta and in this series. And in Legacy, I had some very, very, very close games, but ended up going 2-3. Both games I lost, I was 1 turn away from ending the game. My opponent was just able to do it sooner. That happens sometimes, you know. And finally, the first week of qualifiers, I jumped in last minute, went 1-2. The next few weeks, if I have time, I'll take it a bit more seriously and put the work in. And with that introduction out of the way, let's get into the games. Beast Druid's recent iteration was popularized by No Hands Gamer. It runs cards like Ivus, Gidra, and Kazakus to help fill out the curve, complement the spells and minions you're running, as well as put on pressure. The version I brought was played by Wild Turn Standard streamer Corbett. Cuts a lot of the later game cards for more aggressive tools like Iron Deep Trog, and sets up early beasts with Frostwolf Kennels and Thorn Growth Sentries to discount our bigger beasts like Frost Saber Matriarch and Umbral Owl, which, once they are discounted below 3 mana, we can combo with Oracle of Elune to go wide to put on pressure and combo with Arbor up. In the mulligan, we keep Iron Deep Trog. The no-hands list my opponent is running gets online a little later and relies on spells to keep up in the early game, so Trog is super disruptive. With the sentries, we have a pretty good protective curve for our Trog. Because of the Peasant top deck, I decide to start there. My opponent can play Druid of the Reef to kill my Trog, and because I want to protect it so it can be disruptive, this seemed like a stronger play. Plus, if Peasant survives, I get cards, and, you know, drawing cards in a card game is pretty good. We do disconnect for a second, and it looks like my opponent played a Nature Studies, which we draw 2. We play Sentries to protect our Peasants, and we get that sweet, sweet card draw. I could have played Nature Studies here as well, but I save it for turn 3 when I can discount Arbor up for turn 4. Speaking of Arbor Up, Trog is super strong with Arbor Up because it allows me to go wide and generate more minions to block. My opponent played Kennels, which will help discount their own beasts. They got very lucky and discovered this off Nature Studies. On my turn, I draw 2 cards. I play Druid of the Reef as a taunt minion for extra protection and play my Trog. I can go to Arbor Up next turn, or play my Discovered card to give my minions more health, then curve into Arbor Up. And I send everything face because, that's the place. My opponent plays an early Ibis, this already showing how disruptive Trog can be, as a 3/3 Divine Shield, which isn't super threatening. They make a value trade and end their turn. On my next turn, to protect my board, I play Pride's Fury. I make a value trade with Trog and send the rest face. My opponent plays the Oracle of Elune, which can be scary, but they can't play any discounted beasts yet, so while it's not threatening now, it is a kill target. They make a trade to remove my taunts, then play their own peasant, which doubles up. However, as you saw, they played a coin, which will give me another Trog. On my turn, I continue drawing extra cards with Peasant. I play my rank 2 Living Seeds, which will draw and discount a beast by 2. I get my second Umber Owl, which I hoped would cost 0, but the 1 mana makes it awkward to play with my Oracle of Elune. I decided to discount it to 0 by playing my second Thorngrowth Sentry. I trade Owl into their Oracle, make a value trade, and summon another Trog. I do want to pause here and share my thinking in this matchup. My goal with this deck is to go wide while keeping my opponent off the board, preventing their Arbor Ups while allowing me to Arbor Up and kill them. The Trogs here are very helpful because they disrupt my opponent's game plan while also furthering my own. My plan works out because my opponent can't push me off the board. They can't develop their game plan, they can't play their spells, and they do know that sooner or later Arbor Up is coming down. Even if they do develop wide, I can still make my value trades and keep my pressure up. My opponent decides to concede, and this kind of shows why I like this version of the deck a little more. It gets online earlier, and Trogs disrupt a lot of different game plans. Broot Demon Hunter is a favorite deck of mine. I loved playing it before the nerf to Irebound Broot. This deck is focused on drawing cards each turn with various spells, tradable minions, and shuffling Shoal Shards, which you can't say 3 times fast, I've tried it, into your deck. By drawing cards, we can discount Irebound Broots and copy them with Philosophy to play multiple 6/7s, 7/8s, and even 8/9s in a turn. If that doesn't work, post-quest, we can draw multiple cards, beef up our Lion's Frenzy to deal massive damage to our opponent. This deck runs Glide as a disruption tool, and when used at the proper time, can change the outcome of the game. Since we know how quest matchups begin, quest on 1, I want to explain why I brought this instead of something like Fell or Death Rattle Demon. Based on my opponent's lineup and my lineup, Fell Demon Hunter and Handlock were pretty big possibilities, and Broot Demon Hunter does very, very, very well into them. And shout out to my captain, Nice Jewish Owl, for sitting down and discussing this with me beforehand. After playing Quest, I realized my hand is not that great. Glide is phenomenal, especially in the Outcast spot, but I want to be able to keep drawing cards and progress my quest. Right now, I have to sit on my hands until turn 4. Glide is really good in this matchup, because Warlock is trying to dig through their deck with their hero power and tour guides and backfires. A lot of cards like Goldshire Knoll and Anathron are discounted by having a full hand. Glide prevents them from capitalizing on those. It makes their 8 or 9 card hands more like 4 cards. They also want to have their deck down to 10 cards for massive power swings, like cards like Baron Scavenger and Bloodshard Bristleback. Glide helps slow this down and disrupt that. Because I plan on gliding next turn, I decide not to play Philosophy to copy the Irebound Broot in my hand. Even though it would give it the buff now, once it's shuffled back in my deck, it would lose the +1/+1, so I just do it. Now this is the turn I was talking about. My opponent has a 9-card hand. This makes it much harder for them to capitalize on the discounts from that. We're just going to glide it away. After the glide, my hand is much, much better. I can draw cards now to further my quest. My opponent does get a second backfire to refill their hand and progress their quest. They also have Altar of Fire to dig through their deck and burn my second glide and an Ironbound Broot. However, to make up for it, I am able to start a chain of draws with Double Jump, Crimson Sigil Runner, Illidari Studies into Spectral Sight, and finally dig up the second Brute, which costs 0. While I'm not able to complete the final part of the quest, I am able to put the Philosophies in the Outcast position to to buff a Broot and play 3 of them. And this turn here is why I brought the deck. Even though my opponent plays a second Altar of Fire and Soul Rends, they can't clear my Broots or play their swing turn mill cards, and with 25 damage on board, my opponent is forced to concede. There isn't much to say about Doomhammer Shaman. This deck has been around for a while, but it really hit its stride during the Forged in the Barrens mini set, where it got Wailing Vapor and Primordial Dungeoneer. The former helps fill out your elemental curve, and the latter helps tutor out other elementals as well as your weapon buffs. When Doomhammer is buffed, it can deal 10 plus damage in a turn. Finally, we can use cards like Broot of the Elements and Instructor Fireheart to close out the game if our Hammer of Thor doesn't quite get there. My opponent is a Fell Demon Hunter, which admittedly is a pretty favored matchup for us, as long as we get Doomhammer online and dodge their Rust Viper. Because qualifiers are open deck list, I know they're running one. Turn 1, I see an awesome tempo play of Kindling Elemental into Coin Granite Forgeborn, which will discount our elementals by 1 for the rest of the game. The Forgeborn isn't cleared off, and I'm able to develop more minions, draw a card by freezing my own Kindling Elemental, as well as protect the Granite Forgeborn from Fel Barrage. I also drew Cage Match Custodian, which will allow me to draw the second Doomhammer to set up in the following turns, as well as dodge Weapon Hates. On turn 4, we don't really have any good plays, and we won't get value out of Lilypad Lurker because my opponent doesn't run a lot of minions, aside from Theridin. We decide to play it anyways because a 5-6 is just good stats. And because of that, we are really putting pressure on the opponent, which forces them to answer with a talented Arcanist Immolation Aura to clear the board. We top deck Rockbiter Weapon, which is huge. Our opponent is currently at 16, and over the next 2 turns with the Storm Strike already in hand, we can deal 20 damage and close out the game. We do decide to stop playing minions here so they can't lifesteal our board and heal, but they do get a Skull Gul'dan, which is a little scary because they could always get a 0-mana Viper. Because of how low life my opponent is, they're forced to play 2 minions and remove them with Fellscream Blast to heal. This isn't the worst in the world. We can deal 10 more damage next turn with Storm Strike, and then follow up next turn with another 6 from Broot of the Elements and another 4 from Doomhammer for another 10. That is assuming the weapon isn't destroyed. We decide to draw more weapon buffs with our Explorer and remove it from the board so the opponent can't heal. The opponent does heal 5 with Kurtrus, but the second Rockbiter weapon we drew makes it a non-issue, and we're able to close out. Even though the highlights you were shown were pretty good games, I still did not have the best week competitively. So a total record of 4-8 isn't very good. But that's why they're called highlights, and this is my channel. I get to show whatever I want. Hopefully next week or the week after I can come back and tell you some good news. For now, here's our record in class data across the board between Legacy, Pro, and Qualifiers. I'll update this each video and add any other competitive spots and series that I play in. That'll do it for this one, guys. Subscribe to keep up with the content I make, hit that like button, and shoot me a follow on Twitter. Have a great one.